Hello there. Welcome back. And thank you for listening. And I'm happy to be back. And I'm thinking that perhaps this is the last episode. Before we get into the actual suttas on right view in chapter 3. Yeah, I was kind of pre-reading a little bit and pre-skimming, and I'm pretty sure I can make it. So just as a quick reminder here, I'm actually recording this for the Meditation Mind Discord community. It's also a community that exists on Reddit. And this is a book club that I began almost, 7 months ago, going through a very particular book. And the book that I've been reading in this community is On the Path, an anthology to the Noble Eightfold Path drawn from the Pāli Canon by Ṭhānissaro Bhikkhu, who's an American Buddhist monk, and he's widely respected for his translations of Buddhist texts and teachings on meditation and the Dhamma. And he was kind enough to put this book in the Creative Commons so that you can read it for free. Anywho, so that is what I am reading. And I left off, actually, on the bottom of page 147, beginning with the last paragraph on page 147. Although the Buddha used that conditionality to explain the causal pattern at work in dependent co-arising, it also underlies some of his explanations of karma on the level of mundane right view. The fact that fabrication fabricates all the aggregates, and that comes from Sutta 120, and that the results of past bad karma depend to a great extent on your present state of mind. Sutta 65. So that's a radical reiteration there, right? Really radical. I'm going to take another run at that. So listen to that. And that the results of past bad karma depend to a great extent on your present state of mind. So once again, kind of implies that we do have some agency, that it is worth developing a practice, that you can cultivate states of mind. The way these two causal principles interact to form a causal pattern that follows some regular laws but nevertheless allows for freedom of choice is precisely the combination needed to allow for the ability to develop skills. It's because actions and their results follow a certain regular pattern that we can learn from them. It's because we have freedom of choice in the present moment that we can use what we've learned to become more and more skillful over time. But the interaction of these two principles also explains more. In general, when the interactions between two principles are complex enough, and dependent co-arising shows that their complexity is more than enough, then even though the original principles may separately be quite simple, their interaction creates complex, nonlinear systems. Scientists studying complex nonlinear systems, both physical systems, such as erosion patterns, and social systems, such as stock market behavior, have found that many of them behave in ways that parallel the way the suttas describe the causal interactions underlying suffering and the path to end of suffering. 4 types of behavior are especially relevant here. Boy, isn't this exciting. I mean, Bhikkhu's making a bold, his function here in this book, which I really appreciate as someone who's not a scholar nor a native to the origin of Buddhism. I think he does a really beautiful job of contextualizing this and kind of setting the stage, setting the table. So right out of the gate here, before we even get into these 4 types of behavior, he's saying, hey, you can look at any kind of system, and, the word system is certainly a very hot, contentious debate in the United States. And here we're going to look at systems through a Buddhist lens. So here he's talking about this idea that in Buddhism, both nonlinear systems and, social systems really operate in the same way from a Buddhist lens. And really the way that one can maybe think about that or consider that idea is by contemplating the 4 types of behavior that Bhikkhu suggests are particularly relevant to the teachings of the Buddha. So the first is that such systems contain many feedback loops. So I don't need to be so dramatic all the time. I get excited. You've heard me talk about feedback loop before. Feedback loop, they can be positive, they can be negative. I get a little excited. I get a little shuffle in my shoes when I'm talking about feedback loops. Let me just take another pass. The first is that such systems contain many feedback loops, where A influences B, B influences C, and C turns around to influence A. So remember, go back and look at earlier sections, maybe 2 or 3 episodes ago, and we kind of talked about this, right, in kind of earlier sections of the book. This type of pattern can be seen in dependent co-arising, where feeling enters into the sequence of many points, allowing one feeling at a later position in the sequence to turn around and re-enter the sequence at an earlier point, where it can influence the factors that condition it. Wow! I think, in Buddhism, we're kind of asked to recognize that we have these feedback loops. And once again, talking about this previously, kind of, mentioning that, that question that came up in the Discord server recently, in the Meditation Mind server specifically. Somebody had asked, hey, what is insight? What does that even mean? And, far be it from me. I mean, it just, I would, yeah. I mean, when you think about what the word means, it almost sounds like there's no way you could answer that and not sound like like a very self-important, self-appointed, But I'll just say this, that I would argue that in Buddhism, this would be insight. In Buddhism. And again, this is my understanding of it. Again, okay, so I'm not a scholar. But my understanding of Buddhism is that recognizing this feedback loop and kind of seeing, and again, I think that's why, meditation and the practice of meditation is so important in Buddhism, because then you can actually watch all of these things that are being described, then you can kind of have like a Gnostic experience of it. You can kind of have like this very kind of personal experience with it by observing, by being the doctor, right? By observing your own processes. So you notice that you have this feedback loop, that it is in fact occurring and arising, that our job really isn't to disrupt it. By becoming aware of it, and by becoming aware of it and kind of, training, right? Training to get a little bit of room between the experience and the reaction. And everybody's different here, right? Like far be it from me to, I only can speak for myself, as you hear me do frequently, about kind of my temperament and kind of where I'm at in my own practice and kind of what I practice with, et cetera, et cetera. But so I can be aware of the feedback loop. I can notice when I'm caught in one. Regular meditation practice helps me to catch it faster. How do I know that it's happening? Well, I can feel it in my body. Somebody had written a question in the Q&A forum, once again, in the server. And I think the question was something like, does anybody know of a meditation that helps me completely get out of my body and kind of, or move just above my head so that I'm kind of like, moving away from the body and kind of like, I'm not getting the question exactly right, but I think that was the general, sentiment, right? And, I recognize that, everybody's going to have people have different views and on all of this. I'll just say that, I am lay Buddhist, And I can't remember, there was somebody who commented back to this questioner saying, it was just a very concise, and I thought I agreed with it 100%. You know, it wasn't rude in any way. It was a lot of precision. You know, it was just something like, you know, from my practice perspective, you're moving in the wrong direction. And I really love the way this responder put it. I love the sentiment of that, because yes, I don't know if the responder to this up was a Buddhist or not, and again, I don't care. I don't really care if, you know, it's irrelevant. But I will say that, yeah, you know, again, I'm reading a book on Buddhism here, right? I'm reading a book on the Pāli Canon, you know, an English version of the Pāli Canon. And so, yeah, this would be the sentiment in Buddhism as well. You're moving in the wrong direction. Truly, if you're trying to get out of your body, you know, if you're trying, and again, I'm not there's no judgment here. There's no like, I'm not saying you're doing it wrong, you're getting it wrong, turn around, no, I'm not, that's not at all. Please, you know, please, again, I want to reiterate that I tip my hat to all who are in any sort of ethical path or kind of, you know, and I also realize that I, you know, happen to be in a kind of privileged state right now where I can even think about this a little bit more deeply than I could a couple of years ago, for instance, when I was just trying to survive. And I realize there's a lot of people in the world right now that are just trying to survive, and they don't have time to be, you know, doing what I'm doing with this book club. And so, gosh, then may I say that I hope that, you know, you can maybe listen to this in the background, and then it can be some solace for you while you're maybe doing a lot more work than you wish you had to be doing right now. Anyway, I'm going way off the rails per the usual. So this is why sati, right, mindfulness, is so important in Buddhism as a feeling. Mindfulness as a feeling state. Mindfulness as a feeling state is very embodied. And so, you know, again, no judgment here, but I might just lovingly push back to this asker and say, might you be open to exploring the body, even if it's scary, even if it's just to dip your toe into, you know, the other day I was I lead a lot of body scan meditations in virtual reality, you know, because, you know, there's a lot of research, and plus, you know, I find that people that come to my sessions seem to enjoy them. I talk on here frequently that I can't really do virtual reality. It makes me kind of ill. Or I should say, what I'm learning is, like, for instance, I just did it yesterday, and I was in there for an hour playing putt-putt golf, and I really enjoyed it. So there's a lot going on. I'll just say it's not, I don't like being in VR for very long, okay? But at any rate, I don't want to get off the rails on the VR. I'll just say that there's a lot of information that's in our body. And our body is also kind of, again, you hear me saying this all the time, but it's only because it's just so true. You know, if you want to do any research on what humans are, you know, have you know, it's been a long process over a couple hundred years, you know, of modern psychology, but the body keeps the score. The body keeps the score of your fabricated conditioning, not the mind. I think Buddhism would argue, and again, maybe I'm wrong. Okay, again, here's where I'm not a scholar. I'll just say from my own experience as a meditator, and you know, being a beginner, because everybody begins in the same place at the beginning. So I was a beginner, you know, like a lot of people that are beginning are now. And that means that when I was a beginner, and I would say I feel very lucky in a way that I think it was a lot easier for me to, well, this is just my opinion. What do I know, right? I can't even really give an opinion because I'm not in somebody else's brain. But I just kind of observe, you know, like my students, I would observe, and I observe, you know, I observe myself and others. I'm thinking that it was probably easier maybe to get access to some of this pre-internet and not pre-internet, but pre-algorithmic kind of, Las Vegas slot machine style, kind of psychological mechanisms that were used to craft social media tools that kind of, in a way, kind of hijacked our attention. And I think from what I've observed, it's making it harder, for people to access this because, but maybe I'm wrong. It's like I hear a lot of people in the server say, I'm trying to meditate my mind. I just can't. My mind is it just won't. And the thing is, though, that's just what the mind does. It's like, that's what it does. I think people come into this kind of expecting, I don't know what they're expecting exactly. How about this? How about I keep reading? Yeah, I'm gonna keep reading. So let's see, I think I left off on, because I am just going off the rails here and nobody's here, so I can totally do that. Feedback loops are of two types, positive and negative. And again, kind of just talking about this, but we'll definitely get more into it again here. An example of a positive feedback loop is what happens when you put a microphone connected to a loudspeaker in front of the loudspeaker. A sound picked up by the microphone will get amplified many, many times until it's deafening. That's called a positive feedback loop, not because it's positively good, but because it tends to intensify the original event. An example of a positive feedback loop, independent co-arising, would be a feeling of pain that, through inappropriate attention, gives rise to angry perceptions that would then circle around to aggravate the feeling of pain. So we talked about this last week, right? And I was giving that example of, in the book here, Bhikkhu talks about this idea of putting your finger in the fire, right? Putting your finger in the fire and then, ow. And then I had said, if you want to think about something that's maybe a little bit more kind of a mental construct, right? Rather than like an actual physical putting your finger into a flame, I'd use the example of anger, right? Or behavioral kind of anger in the body. So shouting, right? I'm angry, experiencing anger, shouting, right? So this is what was talked about last week, right? So circling back around here to kind of repeat this little area. Let me get back. So it's saying, right, it's not because it's a positive experience, right? But it's amplifying it, right? It's kind of using how sound works, this kind of idea of amplification. So it's saying an example of a positive feedback loop independent co-arising. So I feel pain. It could be, right? It could be physical pain. This just actually happened to me today. So my cat, I love my cat so much, okay? And our neighbor found him when he was a kitten and he just brought him over to our house and was like, we can't have this cat. You want this cat? And we're like, yes. And so he's been with us now for like 15 years, and he's getting old and you can tell he's having a hard time moving around and his personality has changed, right? I mean, anybody who's been around anybody who's aging is probably familiar with how our personality changes, right? And, this can be quite radical, profound changes, if you're dealing with dementia, Parkinson's, right? Or it can be just kind of small little things that you notice. And that's kind of how my cat is, he's just little thing. I mean, not so little like today, but also nothing that, has become overly problematic. So I do the thing with our cat. We do the thing with our cat that, I realize many don't think is good, and at least where I live, and right on, but it's, like I said, I grew up on a farm, on a hippie commune we also were farming and had some farming animals. And, where how I come up is the cat's an indoor-outdoor cat. So, because our cat is an indoor-outdoor cat, we live in the city, so we kept his claws in because we want to make sure that he can take care of himself. You're going to let your cat go outside. You can't take their claws away, and that's their defense mechanism. So, he's getting old though, and his vision's bad and he's having a hard time seeing, and because of that, when he goes outside, he's more insecure, right? Because his vision's bad, and I think he knows it. And so I notice that he's a little bit more hypervigilant. I promise I'm getting somewhere with the story. Okay, I swear. So today, I like every day, it's like, no, it's not, nothing's different. Same, right? Happened yesterday, day before that. Yep. Today, take him outside. I'm going to drink out of the faucet like he always does. And I turn to walk away and boom, he just lunges and just full on, just claws in, attacks my leg. And he's done this a couple of times. So as I just kind of laid out the context for that, right? That, was it a personal attack? Of course not. It's a cat, right? My cat is a cat. Not only is my cat a cat, but my cat is losing his eyesight. He's outdoors. Cats are territorial and they mark their territory. And so now he doesn't have any control over his space because we're outside. The mower's going in the neighbor's yard. The dogs are barking directly behind us. We live right by an airport. The plane is going overhead. So he's being bombarded by sensory stimuli. And who knows what he thought I was? A bird? A squirrel? A rat? I don't know. But that's what happened, right? So now I'm going to tie it back around to this idea. Let me tell you about my positive feedback loop today. My cat attacked my leg. I felt physical pain. Okay. His claws were sunk into my skin. He drew blood. That happened after the fact. I realized that later, but I knew at the moment happened. Son of a... So I immediately felt pain. Now, in that moment, I really didn't have the bandwidth to apply appropriate attention to what happened. Right now I can. I'm doing it right now, right here with you. Thank you. And you're welcome, right? Seriously. But in the moment, right? No. In the moment, I felt pain. And I just got angry. God, rah! And of course I didn't hurt him. Okay, not at all. But I did yell and hiss and get down. And I don't even know if that was probably the right move to make. I really don't. But I was angry and there was a lot of pain. And so that's what I did. I just, just marched off and went to go get a Band-Aid and hissed and yelled at him and that was it. Okay, was that the most loving, glorious response ever? No. And probably that could have escalated. If that would have been a human, that could have escalated even more, right? Like, I'm a lot bigger than my cat, but let's say that he's bigger than me or we're the same size. Well, that quote unquote positive feedback loop could have gone on indefinitely until somebody was dead. So I realize that's kind of like a radical, that is a radical example of all of this, but I think that might be an example of all of this. Oh, wow, I got to go check the Discord because I don't have notifications. Make sure that there's nobody here still. So I think I'm going to continue reading. Okay, yeah, so that is the quote-unquote positive feedback loop in Buddhism. An example of a negative feedback loop is a heater connected to a thermostat in the same room. When the heater raises the room temperature to a certain point, the thermostat will turn off. When the room cools to a certain point, the thermostat will turn the heater back on. This is called a negative feedback loop. Again, not because it does anything negative, but because the two members work in opposing directions to keep each other in check. An example of a negative feedback loop independent co-arising would be an emotional pain that, viewed with appropriate attention, gives rise to skillful perceptions that would circle around to dampen the pain. Oh, I love this. This is just so rich. Okay, so I'm just going to take a moment because I checked the Discord and there is nobody in there. So I can just take a little moment here to ponder that. So kind of just gave a very kind of overt example of the positive feedback loop, right? So yeah, let's talk about this kind of negative feedback loop, which is, quite important as well. So the example that's given, an emotional pain. So we'll stay away from cat, right? Because that's a bad example. I didn't have an emotional, I did have an emotional response to cat, anger, right? I realized it wasn't personal, but I was experiencing pain. And in that kind of moment, it felt very personal, right? And so I was able to, I kind of had that knee-jerk reaction. And then I was able to use my practice to kind of all right, go and do what I needed to do. So let's find a good example here for this negative feedback loop. Well, you hear me talking about it all the time. I just feel so old. I'm just trying to, gosh, anyway, it's like everything old, it's just probably hearing the same stories over and over and over again. But just any emotion, I've mentioned to you before that, well, here's one. I'm trying to think of a really good, experiences that I can use to kind of make this accessible. So today, every Friday, in addition to dropping this book club in the morning, I'm very active in several different organizations that I volunteer with. And on Fridays, I spend time with one of the community leaders of that organization. And we get together and we kind of brainstorm on things that we can do to attract more volunteers and kind of build up this really cool organization that I, really believe in. So we're in there today, right? We're in our office hours, which is in a kind of like a virtual, I won't bore you with that, but we're in our office hours. People could come in, and we had a couple of new people come in. Now, I'm a little bit socially awkward. I mean, I'm socially awkward in real life, okay? Anybody who knows me, maybe they don't know that I am. Because maybe I'm good at masking it and I don't realize it, but I can tell you right here and right now that I'm extremely introverted, and I am very, very socially awkward. And that even though I've taught for many, many years, that required a lot of masking, and that when I got out of the classroom, I was absolutely exhausted. And I think it's why I never want to be in a classroom like that again. It's not particularly conducive to extreme introversion, which is what I've got going on. And by the way, that's not a pathology, okay? So I like being an introvert, and I have to say that I think introversion and Buddhism, they complement each other pretty well. So it's working out in my favor, but it doesn't always. And today it didn't. So here I am, right? I'm actually in a virtual kind of environment. I'm not in VR, but I'm in a avatar, and I'm kind of in that kind of virtual social environment. Now I know the person who runs it well, and we talk every week, and so this is someone that I know, right? And I'm kind of more comfortable around, and so two other people came in. One who I have just met recently, but don't really know. We've only kind of briefly talked here and there, and then another person that I didn't know, and I didn't really know what to do. Okay, because there's that kind of dynamic, right? That systems, right? Power, right? I didn't know. I knew I wasn't leading this particular team. I was just kind of there, but I also know that we're collaborating so I didn't really quite know what to do. And the anxiety, right? The anxiety starting in my body. Now, hopefully nobody here in this particular visit knew that this was going on for me. Okay, and because they couldn't physically see me, that's great. And I think I don't know. My poker face, my poker face could be better. Well, I won't bore you with why my poker face is bad. Part of my poker face is bad is because I don't try to mask it anymore. But at any rate, I could feel the anxiety, right? Emotional. Now that's going to sound bizarre, but yeah, emotional pain. What do I mean by emotional pain? So now we're getting into it. Emotional pain. Now a lot of this is kind of happening under the surface, and I also kind of saw it happening in real time. And I think what happens when you meditate, okay, I'm not special. There's nothing special about me. I am I assure you, a very average human being, okay? But I think when you start to develop a practice, you can kind of start to notice things happening in real time, okay? In terms of your kind of meta, this kind of, anyway. I noticed that I was starting to feel like I didn't know what to do, and I felt like everything coming out of my mouth was wrong. And I don't even remember thinking thoughts like I'm weird or whatever, but I think on some level they were operating in the background because my thought stream was suggesting to me that it was. Okay, like, should I stop talking? I'm talking too much. I'm going to mute myself so that I stop talking. So there was that whole thing going on. This whole kind of emotional kind of pain was going on. I hope this is making sense. I hope this is hitting a pocket for someone listening, because I have to go on soon because I haven't read much. But as I'm talking to you right now, do you see what I'm doing? I'm viewing it with appropriate attention. And I'm happy to report that I was able to do that in the meeting as well. And that's why I also muted my mic, not just to make sure that I wasn't talking too much and that I in fact was making space for other voices, but also because I needed to do this process of processing in real time, of viewing it with appropriate attention so that it would give rise to skillful perceptions, which it was. I feel, I don't know, what do you think? I just gave it to you, my perception. I think for myself, speaking for myself, it was pretty astute. That I saw where my patterns were coming from. I saw what was going on. I saw what was happening in real time. And I could circle all that back around to dampen my pain in real time. And it did. Rather than kind of projecting that, I was able to just mute when I needed to. I was even able to say, hey, I'm not very good at multitasking, so I'm gonna turn my mic off and I'll get right back. So, long explanation, okay, for something, but it kind of needs it because, there's a lot of depth here in Buddhism. There's a lot of depth in these ideas. It's not like some, like something you get out of a fortune cookie here. So this stuff's got a lot of depth. Okay, I'm going to continue reading. The fact that the causes of suffering contain feedback loops of these sorts places two obstacles in the path to their cessation. One is that their complexity can often make it hard to see exactly what the causal patterns are. Yeah, right? As you just saw through my dissecting that, complicated. A small action can be amplified by a positive feedback loop in one instance and dampened by a negative loop in another. The second obstacle is that the patterns these loops create are so unstable and in their details so unpredictable that there's no guarantee that when you change the input, the system will show the effects of your actions right away. This means that when you start practicing, there's no way of predicting how soon you'll see the results you want. This can often be discouraging. I don't feel like I need to stay too long on this because, that's exactly right. This is kind of what I just did with you right now about one instance in my life that happened in the blink of maybe 2 to 3 minutes where all kinds of things are going on, all kinds of methods are happening. If you practice, right, that can kind of help with all of this. And this is why it can be so complex, right? And this is why it's such a great idea to recognize impermanence. Isn't what he's describing here pretty much an excellent definition of impermanence? Listen to what's being said here, right? Yeah. So, it's unstable, it's unpredictable. You don't really know when, and so this is also why in Buddhism it's a really great idea to not get too concerned. And I realize in the West, we're all about results, right? How long is it going to take me to lose the 10 pounds? Right? When will I be smarter? When will I have, So we're very much into that over here in the West, if you're listening to this and you're a Westerner. And I know it sounds hokey and all that, but it ain't trite, man. It ain't trite. These philosophies are really much more in alignment with the journey, baby. But no, seriously, they are. Because there's nowhere to get. It's all, really, it's just, so then what? Right? Then you're just gonna fabricate something else to want. How's that working out for you, right? However, the main advantage of a system containing many feedback loops, such as those found in dependent co-arising, is that it's neither strictly deterministic nor totally chaotic. The forces governing the system can be pushed in many different directions to lead to many different outcomes. If the push is done with knowledge of the principles underlying the system, it can lead the system to produce the desired results. Once again, this little section right here is where things like, I realize, things like the law of attraction are very popular in the West. And a lot of these have, not to say that, all of these ideas, they have a lineage. Okay, and I kind of talked about the lineage some in different episodes, and I'm not a scholar. Well, I've read a lot of books, but I'm not a scholar, okay? But I do know a little bit from a Western perspective, the lineage of these ideas. And this idea right here is where I would say, the law of attraction, or those kind of theosophy, the kind of early American science of mind, kind of coming out of the Edwardian period, where they kind of borrowed, they kind of took some ideas that were central. And I won't speak to Hinduism, I don't know enough about it, but definitely were central to Buddhism, and kind of massaged it and changed it to do whatever they were doing with it. But here, this idea right here is, kind of this idea that, you can, create your own reality. You can manifest whatever. It's not quite that simplistic, I would argue. But at the same time, you do have a huge role to play. And it could be that simplistic, potentially speaking, right? The Buddha would say, yeah, it could. You can push the system of dependent co-arising in the direction that you want through practice. Right. What this section is saying is that you can train the mind, right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration, what things we'll get to later in the rites. You can train the mind so that you can actually push this arising, right? This mental, this what's arising. You can actually direct it like a flippin' flashlight, right? You can direct it. You can direct it to where you want it to go, away from causing suffering and towards suffering's end. Where I think it really gets very, very different, that where maybe the law of attraction maybe on those ideas. Okay, once again, look at people like what's her name, Mary Baker Eddy, or Charles Haanel. Or, there's a lot of people, and if you're looking at the thread in the Discord, there's just type in my name. Oh my, anyway, yeah, can you flip this around to manifest whatever you want? I'm just gonna stay away from that. I don't know. Maybe, I don't know. You certainly hear people talking about that. I really don't know. It's just kind of not really where I personally put my energy, but I have no judgment against it. In particular, if you use knowledge to create skillful feedback loops in the mind by passing the causal sequence through appropriate attention again and again, those small changes can amplify throughout the system, forcing it to go in the direction you want it to go. This fact connects with the second feature of complex nonlinear systems. They contain different basins of attraction. In other words, if the parameters acting on the system stay within a particular range, the system's behavior will be attracted to a particular outcome. Sound familiar if you're into the law of attraction? Like a ball circling around the floor of a basin and coming to rest in the lowest part of the basin. If those parameters pass over a threshold, the system's behavior will be attracted to another, quite different outcome. Like a ball pushed over the edge of a basin and into another basin. An example of this sort of shift is weather at the North and South Poles. When subject to continuous sunlight, the temperatures will fluctuate within a certain range. When subjected to continuous darkness, they'll move to an entirely different range. Isn't this cool? Well, if you can really kind of get behind this idea and maybe see the reason or the reason to it, maybe even get a glimpse of it in a retreat or whatever, as I mentioned that, you can get a glimpse. You don't have to people get glimpses in different ways. You can come to appreciate how radical this is, right? And how you can actually use this to your benefit, which again is why I practice Buddhism, because these are tricks. Boy, these are tricks that I find quite useful in my own life. In terms of dependent co-arising, the parameters governing the system lie within the system itself, in the factors of ignorance versus knowledge, and inappropriate versus appropriate attention. The system will head towards suffering under the influence of ignorance and inappropriate attention, but toward the Noble Eightfold Path and the end of suffering under the influence of their opposites. And I don't know that I need anything else to add there, right? This has come up again and again and repeatedly throughout the text so far. It's this is why we cultivate. This is the answer to why we practice. This is the answer to why the discipline. And again, not everybody agrees. Right? Again, this is the Buddhist. This is the. I would say maybe probably the closest would be the Theravāda kind of. This is coming from the Pāli Canon, which is considered one of the kind of original texts of Buddhism. Okay, so again, this is kind of where this is coming from. The third relevant feature of complex patterns is called scale invariance. What this means is that patterns operating on the small scale also operate on the large scale. This can be seen in aerial photos of erosion patterns that are identical, whether they are on the scale of a few inches or many hundreds of miles. How cool is that? The same principle applies to the mind. If you learn how to deal with the complexities of karma and becoming in the present moment, you learn the larger complexities of karma and becoming as they apply over large spans of time. And when you learn about the patterns of karma and becoming over large time scales, they can teach you lessons about how to deal skillfully with your mind in the present. In fact, that's what the Buddha did on the night of his awakening. He learned about the pattern of intention and views on the large scale in his second knowledge, and then applied that pattern to his mind in the present moment in the third. So again, he's saying right here, look, this is available. It is available. It's available, right? He's kind of telling us this was his process. We know the story, and I haven't had a chance to drop this in the last episode, and I promised I would. So I got to get on that. But that I would write a little bit. Actually, what I wanted to write about for the last episode was more about like what was like I don't want to use the word classroom, but what was the room like? What was the space like when Buddha was teaching? Was it kind of more Socratic, or was it more like you raise your hand and so I'm going to do some research to try to find out for us. But now I'm kind of wanting to know, I have a different question about, Buddhist time, in particular right here, which is I'll drop a little bit more information for you, about, the story of Buddha and how he, quote unquote woke up. But, Hermann Hesse, also, I dropped a book earlier, has a really great, it's a book of fiction, but I think it's a really beautiful book about what we believe we know about what we believe is the historical man, Siddhartha Gautama, who, again, was born in warrior class in India, 2,500 years ago plus, and kind of his journey. And, here again, he's telling us this is what he realized, this is what happened. The fourth relevant feature is that in most complex systems, the principles that put the system together can also be used to take the system apart. An example is the complex gravitational relationship among the sun, earth, and moon. It's possible for the moon's trajectory to reach a point called a resonance, where a member of one of the equations describing its trajectory gets divided by 0. When that happens, the result lies outside the system. The moon will leave its orbit and go flying in a direction that cannot be predicted, even though it was brought to that point by following the laws of gravity. Ooh. In the same way, even though our experience is created by fabrication, and our experience of space and time is shaped by our actions, we can still fabricate our actions to get outside of those dimensions by arriving at a point of equilibrium where intention stops and the present moment is, in effect, divided by 0. That's where release is found. So I think that I've mentioned before, when I have read or heard an explanation of what happens in meditation when you drop below thought. And this is what happens in meditation when you learn how to drop below thought. Okay, I don't have supernatural powers. There's nothing special about me. You can learn to drop below thought, not above thought, not outside of your body. You can learn to drop below thought And yes, this is absolutely, as I mentioned before, I have had moments. And wow, when you find that that's possible, you start to question all of it, right? And you can't go home again. So, woohoo! Rustle it up! Anyway, okay, I'm gonna keep on talking. I'm a little slap happy. It's been a really long day. Okay, here we go. The analogy of resonance also illustrates roughly what happens after each level of awakening. After the moon has entered a resonance and momentarily left the system, the laws of gravitation bring it into a new relationship with the sun and the earth. In a similar way, after an experience of awakening, a person returns to the six senses, but in a new relationship to them. In the first three levels of awakening, certain fetters, that's a word you'll hear often in Buddhism, and I'll try to remember here to drop that word in there. Fetters. In the first three levels of awakening, certain fetters are dropped from the mind, but not all, which means that there is still some clinging in the mind's relationships to its objects. Sutta 324. After total awakening, though, when all the fetters are dropped, the relationship is radically different. The Arahant is aware of the six senses, but disjoined from them. And that comes from Sutta 24 and Sutta 359. In this way, such a person continues to experience the results of old karma until the total release occurring at death. The analogy breaks down here, however, in the sense that unlike the gravity of the earth and sun acting on the moon after the moon has altered its course through a resonance, nothing in the six senses ever exerts any pull on the mind of an arahant at all. The behavior of complex nonlinear systems, in addition to showing how the fabrications that lead to suffering can be changed to fabrications that lead to the end of suffering, also helps to explain a central feature of the Buddhist teachings on suffering and its end. The fact he provides so many different explanations of how suffering is originated and so many different lists of the factors leading to its cessation. For example, as we noted above, dependent co-arising is explained in many different ways, with some factors appearing in some explanations and not in others. The Noble Eightfold Path lists its factors in one order, the triple training, in another. The existence of many feedback loops in the causes of suffering show not only why it was valid for the Buddha to express his teachings in these different ways, but also why it was skillful. Just as the causes of suffering act in a mutually reinforcing way, so do the factors leading to its end. For people caught at different points in the various feedback loops of dependent co-arising, it's good to have a variety of entry points and lines of attack for dealing strategically with the causes of suffering and turning the process of fabrication to a good end, and in showing how suffering comes from causes that are reciprocal and mutually reinforcing. The complexity of that conditionality drives home the point that the path to the end of suffering will require factors that are reciprocal and mutually reinforcing as well. And yes, I love this. And look at that. So we are now at a point right at the top of the hour here, just as I predicted, where we're going to be getting into the readings. And but before I end for the evening here, I just want to say that this was mentioned in the episode last week, or in the book, in the section, and Bhikkhu talked about this last week, or earlier in the book rather. That Buddha was a teacher, right? He was a real guy, just like, if you're coming at this from another tradition that has a teacher. In Buddhism, Siddhartha, when he was Siddhartha, was a man, and when Siddhartha was called Buddha, he was the same man. I mean, he was the same man, kind of like what it's saying right here. Once you have kind of like insight, there's that word again, insight. You don't become a god. You're still, he had an experience, right? And here he's trying to explain it. And here he's saying, hey, my job as a teacher, at least this is kind of how I've always taken it. And this is why I want to go back and find out, what were these classes like? Like if I was living 2,500 years ago and women were his students as well, Thank you, Buddha. So I could have been in his class. What was it? What would it have been like? Like, are we sitting on the floor? What are we wearing? Are people raising their hands? Are we working? Are we splitting off into groups? Are we, right? Is it gamified? Like, no, but in all seriousness, is it more Socratic? Is it more of like, I kind of get the feeling that it was more Socratic, and of course, Buddha came before Socrates. Not to say that, Socrates stole that, not at all. Just saying that, hey, I really appreciate, that kind of, there's no sage on the stage, right? It's more like, hey, here was an experience that I had. And as you can see here, as he's saying in this last section, or at least kind of how I'm taking this, is that Buddha really refined the ability to come at this no matter where his students were coming from. They use the word entry point here, right? So no matter where the student was coming from, he would try to find a way to make these ideas, this thing that he experienced that to his view really helped. I don't even know. I wasn't there. I don't know. But he clearly spent the rest of his life until he was dead teaching it. So he had an experience, right? So he had a way, he seemed to find, as we'll continue to read, it quite significantly important to know your audience and to not speak to them where you want them to be, but where they in fact actually are. Why? If you want them to be somewhere, well, then you're not practicing Buddhism. You're wholly squarely in your ego. And I would suggest that the Buddha might tell you to go back and sit your ass down and meditate and not come back until you're ready to drop it. That's what I bet he would say. Maybe he wasn't that harsh. I kind of am. But at any rate, I wanted to leave it with that, that at the end of the day, he was this guy who was a teacher, and he found for himself a way to live in a middle way that made for a life that was quite lovely and quite free from stress and anxiety. And it's not for everyone, and he knew that too, and he said that too. But he was, but he also came at it with great passion. From what we know about, if you believe that he existed at all and you believe any of the right, then we know he was quite passionate. And so when you're passionate, I taught for 20 years. When you're passionate about a topic and you really, 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 really care about it, and you want other people to get excited, I found for myself that it almost is natural. It comes naturally to you to want to make it accessible for whoever is in the room. Why? Because you genuinely want them to have it. Because you genuinely want them to have it. And I think that that's really, what I'm thinking of here. So I'm going to sign off. I'm going to sign off and bid you adieu and say I'm so thrilled that when I come back next week for episode 30, we'll be getting into the actual suttas that Bhikkhu compiled that specifically deal with right view. All right. Thank you so much for listening, and be well. Bye.